Marion, you're very welcome to Centre Ground. What is the burning issue of the week?
Hi, Anna. Thanks very much. Well, the burning issue for the week for me is certainly around who's profiting and who's benefiting. Let me just give you a frame of reference for that. Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Capitalism. It's a book written by Naomi Klein, who was a Canadian author and activist back in 2007. And she argued that neoliberal or the free market policies have risen in many countries, and they've risen to prominence because there is a deliberate strategy of governments at the time to take advantage of crises and introduce what she calls shock therapy. Let me just give you a quick overview of that, because I'm going to have a look at, well, how does what we are living right now fit in with her thesis around that? Because she used the term shock doctrine to describe the brutal tactic of using the public disorientation and shock following a collective shock or crisis. And they use that time to push through radical pro-corporate measures, often called shock therapy. And this is how power profits from crisis and increases the inequality gap, which is the hallmark of neoliberalism. So I'm looking at, in his announcement of a suite of measures to deal with the C-19 crisis back in April, our Taoiseach then, Leo Varadkar, he assured us that, quote, "We are all in this together, and nobody in any walk of life should seek to be better off or seek to make a profit out of this crisis." Well, let's have a look at how that commitment has actually stacked up in reality some 6 months on. I'm going to use 3 examples. Number one, we were all terribly relieved to see that we had finally eliminated the 2-tier health system we suffer here in Ireland, when it was announced that private hospitals were going to be taken into use. Well, the 100 million we paid each month to the 18 private hospitals went to companies owned by religious orders, foreign investors, 2 billionaires, a vulture fund, and a private backer. And it should really be noted that the amount that we paid is well above, I think it was estimated to be 4 times higher than private hospitals were charging the UK's NHS. So let's look at the other measure, which was a relief when we heard it, but we have to get behind that. We were all going to have a payment holiday on our mortgages, a moratorium. However, it emerged that it isn't a moratorium at all, because it's going to end in September by all means. But what we're actually looking at here is, no, it's just we've stopped charging you, and we're going to add that onto the life of your mortgage. And what we're going to do is we're going to charge interest on the interest accrued during this 6 months. So they're actually charging interest on the interest, and that should amount to about £2,000. Work out the maths, but it's, fair. Hello. Last thing I wanted to talk to you about was, look, the emergency powers. We've seen them, and these powers are used to introduce the Civil Law and Criminal Law Bill, and essentially this allows vulture funds to use photocopies as evidence in eviction court cases, and this has never been seen. The emergency legislation was used to put that through. There is much controversy over, well, was this an emergency? No, it wasn't. But essentially, Pierce Doherty describes that legislation as rolling out the red carpet to vulture funds. So there's 3 examples. And let me finish up by giving you a quote from People Before Profits, Richard Boyd Barrett. He basically says that, look, this is a time we're giving far too much power to our government, who are using ill thought through and incoherent, unfair legislation, and using that legislation to turn regulation into criminal acts. So it's time this much stop. That's a paraphrase of it. So my question I put to our guests and yourself is, just taking into account this concept of shock therapy Are we actually experiencing that now? I know that a lot of people were in shock, having had to wade through the confusion of last night's new roadmap announcement. But my question I put out to you is, are we being subjected to this idea of shock therapy here? And is there a deliberate, in other words, attempt to slip through unpopular measures that will benefit corporate investors and slip through legislation as well that will benefit corporate investors? And quite frankly, are we all in this together? I don't think so. Some more than others, perhaps,